Hello, everyone's Forest Focus is a great time to be a Nottingham Forest fan, 7th in the Premier League, 3-1 winners at Leicester City, and taunting home fans with a chant about how much their own manager hates them. We'll discuss that Friday night win in full and the key factors behind it, plus ponder how long this form can continue in the company of, first of all, Reds fan Michael Temple. Temps, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Matt. Still high from Friday, mate.
Good. We'll come to you being in the away end and what you made of it. But second guest today is Reds fan and TNT Sports commentator Darren Fletcher. Fletch, good to have you back. How are you doing today?
Very good, mate. Thank you.
Good. Kick us off, Fletch. Just general thoughts on Friday's game specifically. What did you make of it?
Well, it's a great time to be alive, isn't it? If you're a Forest supporter. I was trying to think the last time that it was like this, and I would say 95, 96. Will I be right? I was covering the club at the time. Frank was the manager. Year after he got relegated, but this would have been the last season where there was this kind of feeling. Forest are a legitimate Premier League team, a good Premier League team, and I just thought the simple way to put it is that they were just a significantly better team than Leicester on Friday, and I think the roles have kind of been switched. You know, the first couple of seasons we would have been the B side of that match, but now Forest are the A side of that match. Everything points upwards. Everything feels good. Everything looks good. Everything looks sustainable. And I know that we're going to get into that as the podcast goes on. But I just thought it was really refreshing to go out there against a team away from home that Forest should beat. And Forest did beat and beat them in the manner that they beat them. I thought they beat them relatively straightforwardly. I was a bit disappointed in Leicester. I thought they went mad about Harry Winks on the television for no apparent reason. I mean, Harry Winks all of a sudden became Iniesta in the eyes of one or two, and I didn't see it. Yeah, there were one or two midfield shortcomings in the first half, but nothing that wasn't fixable. So I just thought that the gap between the two was wide. That's what it should look like. That's what I wanted it to look like. So all in all, I was really happy.
Yeah, and Gary Neville was saying that Harry Winks is the player England need. I saw on social media that there was another English midfielder on the pitch that would be ahead of him for me, or two I would say, in Anderson and Yates. But yeah, good stuff. Good to have 200 people plus with us already. Plenty noting that we did start on time. I think we might have started early for the first time ever. So do us a favour and hit like if you haven't already. Temps, you were in the away end. General reflections, but should we have won 4 or 5 or 6 even?
Of course we should. Dominguez chance, first half, great save, credit the keeper for that. Yatesy missing that tap in at the back stick. Sosa breaking through and just not quite finding a way with his interplay late on when we're just carving them up at will. But good value for 3-1. Could easily have been 5 or 6. And general reflections from me as a Forest fan at the away ground. I wasn't at the Liverpool game. I was trapped in the theatre hall with my little girl watching some circus with no phone signal. So that one's lost on me forever. But the feeling and the manner in which Forest outsang a home side in a local derby that supposedly means everything to Leicester and a little bit less to us was testament to that connection that's building again. It wasn't there at the start of Nuno's reign. We kind of missed that the story we had, the narrative we had with Steve Cooper having brought us from where he did to where he left us, but it's there now. I think there is an understanding of what Nuno's done, how we've progressed from what we were under Cooper at a point now where we can look forward, be on the front foot away from home, and as Fletch said, put teams to the sword who are on paper and on grass not at our level. I thought we were outstanding, great value for the win, and it just feels more sustainable now.
I'll ask you about Nuno and Chris Wood and people we might have generally underestimated as fans in general. Just I want to address the away end chanting. So I don't want to focus on Steve Cooper, but it was pretty funny, I thought, at 3-1 to be chanting the Steve Cooper song. What did you make? I assume it was just 99% to wind up Leicester fans and 1% as a little nod to Cooper before kind of moving on, as we all have done.
There was no animosity towards Steve Cooper. I think he played it wrong in the build-up, just refusing to even acknowledge that he used to be the manager of Nottingham Forest. I think he played that a little bit wrong. Nuno was far more circumspect in the manner in which he spoke about Steve Cooper and what he'd done for the football club and the platform that he'd inherited. So I think we won the mind games, if you can call it that, in the build-up. But there's still love for Steve Cooper amongst the Forest fan base. Singing that song was a wind-up to the Leicester fans rather than any kind of detriment to him. But yeah, he had a miserable night. And the reason is our football team's better than his.
What about Nuno and people we generally underestimated? Fletch, I guess, do we kind of, I don't know, not eat a bit of humble pie, but Nuno's done a better job than I thought he ever would thus far, to be honest,
I think in a way it was understandable because he was replacing a man that had meant so much to the fan base. So I think the next man in after Steve Cooper, popularity was always going to take a little bit of time because Steve was so popular for so many reasons. So I think the way that people felt is completely understandable. I think the biggest compliment I'd pay him right now is that there are a lot of characteristics in the way that the Forest team play. When you look at the way his Wolves team played, yes, there are different players, and yes, he sometimes played three at the back and what have you, but the characteristics, the basics of what they do are relatively similar. It's a style that he knows. It's a style that he's comfortable with as a manager. And I think the biggest compliment you can pay him is that he inherited issues when he came. And there was a startling statistic that came up on the television screen on Friday. And that was, I think, when the number came up, I think they'd faced Forest 51 corners so far this season, hadn't conceded a goal. Now, that was the biggest Achilles heel the team had last season. Every time the opposition got a corner, you thought they were going to score. And we said last season, didn't we? His big challenge is to go away and deal with the deficiencies. And he has. The deficiencies that were there are no longer there. So his work on the training pitch, the fruits of that are there for everybody to see. So I think when you start to assess him, we can often, as football supporters, make the assessment based on whether we like someone or not. But the reality of the situation is here, that the recruitment has been very good, and he no doubt has an influence on that. The whole club seems a lot more settled around the first team than it has done for quite some time, and that mirrors his personality. But he's a very practical man, and he's got the team playing in a way that it suits the team. And he doesn't care what anybody thinks about that. That's the way that he wants to play. But those deficiencies that really held the team back last season have gone because he's gone on the training pitch, he's worked on it, he's analysed what needs to happen, and he's made the team better in those areas. And I think as a managerial job goes, he's done it as well as he could have done it because he's also done it with the spectre of you might only be a game or two away from getting the sack. So he's coped with the pressure. He's replaced someone that will always be regarded, I think, at the City Ground as a legend in Steve Cooper. And in a relatively short space of time, he's managed to put his imprint on the team, get rid of a lot of the problems. And now, as we all think, Forest are now operating in a different area in the Premier League than they have been. And I think a lot of that is squarely down to the work that he's done.
Do you think he's made them, this word sounds like a knock attempt, but it's not, functional? Because you look at a lot of teams, like I watched Palace and Spurs yesterday, both look slightly dysfunctional. I know Palace won the game. Man United, West Ham, so many teams have got problems. It feels like Forest know what they are, and Nuno knows what they are, and the players know what they are. And there's a lot of value in that, isn't there?
If by that you mean there's a logic in our eyes to what we see him doing, the teams we see him selecting, the manner in which he's tweaking it between games, then yes, there is a plan. And the refreshing thing, and the bit we've got to get used to quickly, is that plan is to play more progressive football so we can compete in games and take teams on where previously we might have sought to avoid defeat. That's a massive shift change in mindset, in personnel, and the manner in which you set up. When you're not just trying to grind out draws away from home, you're going front foot. I was surprised to see both wingers starting. I think that's another departure from the way even Nuno was setting up earlier in his reign, where he might have a more defensively minded wide player or someone that's going to support the fullbacks. But no, we allowed Hudson-Odoi and Alanga to stand on their fullbacks, to cheat a little bit and to take it to them from the off, and it paid off. I think that the one point that Gary Neville had with Winks was he was given space to make those progressive runs, and we made him look good because we weren't battering him. And the reason for that was the overload down the right and the left was facilitated by Dominguez or Anderson abandoning their post a bit to be front foot and attacking. And we had to make a tactical adjustment there. But all of the tactical adjustments that I'm seeing from Nuno, both pre-game and in-game now, from his mobile phone at the back of the stands, by the way, rather than him directing traffic from the dugout at this point, have been positive. So yeah, I do see the logic. We do seem organised, and it is all the more sweet when your mates who support Spurs or Man U are having the time that they're having. 2 points, Matt. One on the question you asked Temps, and one on a point that Temps has just made.
I don't think we should underestimate, and there were shortcomings in central midfield in the first half. We shouldn't underestimate the ability of Morgan Gibbs-White to play two positions at the same time. Morgan Gibbs-White has to be the most energetic number 10 in the Premier League out of possession. And I think it's wrong to expect Elliot Anderson to replicate that. I think they're different characters. I think they've got different skill sets. And I think when he's out of possession, Morgan, he becomes the extra man in midfield naturally because of that wonderful competitive instinct that he has. And we've spoken about this on the podcast before. So I think his desire to go and do a defensive shift from the number 10 position does cover off some of the shortcomings that you see when he's not on the pitch. I think we often focus on whether he's going to score a goal and whether he's going to make a goal, but his all-round commitment to the cause, I think when it's not on the field, you miss it. And in terms of functionality, I would never see that as a negative, because I would say the most functional team in the Premier League is Manchester City. If anybody has a system and a way and a method that they're not going to move from, it's them. And if you look at it, they don't score too many goals off the cuff. They've got a way of playing, overloading situations, generating opportunities through a method that's worked for them time after time. So I think functionality in that regard should be seen as a compliment, not as a negative, because the best team in the Premier League right now is probably the most functional team in the Premier League right now as well. So I see that as a big positive. I think it's actually refreshing that you look at this Forest team now and it knows exactly what it is. The manager knows what he wants it to be. The players know what they're expected to do. And it's a finely tuned system that suits everybody. And there's nobody out there on the pitch with a question in their mind that says, where should I be in this particular moment? What should I do in this situation? Everybody knows. And they can play now without thinking, because it's all natural to them. And I think it's a great thing to see, because it can be the difference in a tight game. And I think it suits Forest down to the ground.
Thank you very much to Connor for signing up for membership. Very much appreciate that, Connor, and all the people that have done it of late. Just quickly, I've got a couple of kind of slides that I've nicked off Twitter that kind of demonstrate this from WT Analysis. Bear with me one sec. There we go. Right. This is first half, and you can see this is the Leicester goal. We were pressing 4-2-4, which is what Liverpool do under Slot, I've noticed, or try to do. And the wingers were wide, as Temp said, that we played very high. And like Fletcher said, Anderson probably struggles to cover the ground that Morgan does. And Winks, in Iniesta Mark II, got a bit of space, set up a goal. Second half, we played a little bit deeper. We tucked the wingers in, and Wood and Anderson stopped the ball getting into Pereira, who inverted. Fair play to Cooper. I don't think we saw that coming, and controlled the game. And I suppose, Temps, it speaks to a couple of things, but it does show we're flexible as well, doesn't it? I think, and we can win games in different ways, which is one of the things that makes me think we can sustain this form over a longer term.
Yeah, and that's why form happens, because what perpetuates is instruction goes in, positive result. You hang off the coaching staff, the managers, every word, the analysis that you do, the ability of the players to follow a brief. And I just think that's an exceptional thing, isn't it? It's Alex Ferguson talking about Ji-Sung Park as the guy that, whilst not the most technically gifted, just carried out a game plan to the letter. So yeah, I think he spotted something there, which did punish us a little bit in the game. The stat that stood out for me was we were starved of possession at times and comfortable for them to tap it around side to side at the back as they were struggling to play through our lines. We had 20 shots from 35% possession, because the way we're set up is to pass from back to front quickly to our fullbacks. And I don't think there's any better exponent of this than Ola Reina at carrying the ball quickly and turnover, launching attack, rather than just tapping it back to the keeper or playing it between the centre halves. That's what we are. The personnel that we have, the pace out wide, the trickery of Callum Hudson-Odoi, the ability of Chris Wood to hold up a ball, these more dynamic central midfielders now, which don't just have one facet to the game, can do that little bit more. So yeah, I wouldn't have been able to foretell how to set Forest up to be like this, but having seen it with our eyes now, there is a certain logic. There are things that we're exceptional at, both as the collective and as the individuals within that system.
I think to back up Temps's point, I don't like to get bogged down with statistics. Some people do. But if you look at the general Opta numbers for the teams this season, I think Forest are second bottom for passes completed, but they're in the top 6 for shots. they're also in the top 6, to back up Tempster's point, for long passes. So it's easy to see the method, and it's easy to see that it's working, that they're not needing the ball for any great length of time to generate opportunities. So it shows that it suits what they're doing and it's working. So I think, again, it all starts to trend towards the fact that it is sustainable. I also think he's been really practical, you know, because I look at the centre-backs and everybody's loving the centre-backs. And quite rightly, because the defence has been outstanding. I'm not necessarily sure whether individually they're quite on the level that everybody suggests they might be at the minute. I'm hearing, I went and had my haircut the other day and the fella was comparing Milenkovic to Van Dijk, which is great. As a Forest fan, that's what we should be doing. But I think he might need to do just a tad more in the Premier League before we quite put him into Van Dijk's category in that regard yet. But when I look at Milenkovic play, the one weakness I think he's going to have is on the turn and having a cover distance. So Nuno plays him deeper, which is fine. It goes against the current trend of everybody playing on a halfway line and working it from there. He's had a look at the players that he's got and said, well, we don't need to do that. We're better doing this. So there's a real practical nature, I think, to the way that he's got the team set up. And I was speaking to Paul Robinson yesterday, the former England goalkeeper, and there's been a lot of question among the fan base, I think rightly so, as to whether goalkeeper might be an area that they might look to get better at, even though Sells is an international. I mean, I think Sells has been excellent this season. So I think right now he's the goalkeeper on merit and should be for a period of time. I hope the conversation about Carlos Miguel has gone away for now. But Paul said one thing that people don't realise is how well he organises those in front of him. And I think that's something that you wouldn't see, but he would as a former goalkeeper. And he said his ability to get everybody in the right position and make sure that everything's where it needs to be if you're going to defend a set piece or whatever. He said he's been excellent at that all season. And that sometimes is maybe an unrecognised strength of the current goalkeeper that's had a direct contribution on the fact the defence has been so good. So I think there are a lot of reasons why they've been so solid. All of them, I think, sustainable. Again, I don't think there's any fluke here. And I think there are little pieces that are starting to come to the fore the further we go through the season, where people are saying, yeah, because of this and because of this. And then you can start to put the layers together and realise exactly why this is happening in the way that it is.
Just before we move on, just take a quick word or quick video, should I say, for the Trent Navigation. We'll see you in 26 seconds on the other side of this advert for the Rick Parfitt gig that is coming up at Christmas. Rick Parfitt Jr., I should say, 22nd December. Get your tickets from gigantic.com. That was good, wasn't it, Fletch?
Did that say Merry Rickmas at the end, or was that just me?
I think it did.
I thought that was fantastic. Brilliant. You know what? Every time I come on, you've got another partner. That board's getting really full.
Good.
Brilliant.
More the merrier, more the merrier. Right, I want to talk about Chris Wood next, but I'm going to do it a little bit back to front. Instead of talking about his goals, I want to talk about his staying on the defensive theme just very briefly. This is a quote from Sean Dyche after their game against Fulham. Awful game, by the way, when Beto scored. Talking about his goal. Working from the front, defending from the front is forever important for the modern day centre-forward. It's not just stand up there and score. Centre-forwards have to defend cutely, not tackles, but getting in passing lanes to cut off the pass, usually to a deep line midfield player. He's got to continue to learn that side as well as scoring goals. That's about Beto. But I raise it, Fletch, because Chris Wood, I think it's like a really underestimated side of his game. He is a modern centre forward, even though big number nines feel like a dying breed a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean that was an interesting point that they made on the television on Friday. That it seemed as though that position was going to become obsolete in the modern game, and then Erling Haaland arrives, and now people can see the benefits of a player of size at the top end of the pitch. I think one thing we shouldn't be too surprised about is the fact that Chris Wood can score goals in the Premier League. I mean, he's done it for quite some time now. The sample size is quite large through Burnley to Newcastle and then to Forest. So I don't know why we should be overly surprised that he can still do it. He's clearly in a system that suits him. And don't forget, this is where Nuno had success at Wolves, when Jimenez was the central striker, similar in build, similar in style, works really well, crosses into the box. The kind of service is paramount to players like Chris. And it goes back to you quoted Sean Dyche, and I've said this on the podcast before. It goes back to something Sean and his staff said, that when you look at him, your first impression is he's a physical target man. He said if you play him that way, that takes away a lot of his strengths. He's a player that's very, very good in the penalty area, clever with his movement, a really good finisher. I think when he's got the ball, he plays like a smaller forward, if you get what I mean. He's not running into central defenders and making a nuisance of himself. He's got excellent subtle movement. He's a really good finisher. I thought the first goal he scored on Friday was exceptional. I think it was the disguise on it that caught the goalkeeper by surprise. He never really has a look. And in actual fact, if you look at him, you would think he's going to roll it to someone on the edge of the box because that's the angle of his head. When in actual fact, he's only got one thing in his mind, and that's to take a shot on target, which he scored from. You see the bravery at the other end, 3v1. He's happy to go in there, knows he might get hurt in the process. He said on the television after, I was expecting to get cleaned out by the goalkeeper. But one thing you notice is he never took his eyes off the ball. So if that was the case, he was quite prepared to take whatever came his way to score the goal. I'm delighted for him. And I think he's a really important player at the club in general, because I think everybody gravitates towards him. He's a popular fella in the changing room, a lot of experience. And again, you know, I don't think, I'm not kidding myself to say he's going to push Erling Haaland for the golden boot. But I think if you can get into the season and get Chris somewhere between 15 and 20 goals, you know, that's kind of the magic spot for a club like Forest to get a forward into that position. That enables you to be in the right half of the league. You're going to win more games than you lose. And I don't see any reason, based on the start, that he's going to be nearer to 20 than nearer to 10 by the end of the campaign.
Thank you very much to Jordan Green for signing up for membership as well. Cheers, Jordan. I suppose as well, Temps, in the ground, you're watching him closely. It's the type of goals he's scoring. I know against Palace, Dean Henderson should save it, but that's a good shot from outside the box, a shot on the turn that isn't even a half chance, and then smart and brave play, as Fletcher says, to score the second goal. He's kind of doing a bit of everything at the moment, which shows confidence as well as quality.
Let's just forget Rick Parfitt Jr. for a second, just pause to play the New Zealand national anthem. So this kid is our talisman at the minute. He's winning games for us. He's gone back ahead of Erling Haaland in the all-time Premier League goal scorers list. He's also ahead, I've written some names down here, he's ahead of Danny Welbeck, Danny Ings, Gabriel Jesus, Eric Cantona, Kevin De Bruyne, Fletcher's mate Kev Nolan. He's in his drift now, Luis Suarez. He's done far more in the Premier League than he's been given credit for.
You can't put Kevin in.
Fletch, stop ruining my stats. Don't ruin my stats. This is the only bit I've written down. He only had 23 touches in the game, and yet his influence was massive. He made Wout Faes look like what he is for me, which is a bang average championship defender. I've thought that about him every time he's played against him. He does not do well against Forest. Woody bullied him. And the subtlety on that header, the craft of the shooting on the turn and finding the corner, the things he's trying are paying off. I think he's been excellent. He's just brought so much to the team this year. And bear in mind, we were trying to spend £30 million on Eddie Nketiah, who's now going to be benched for a while, so Jean-Paul Mateta can come and do a bad impression of what Chris Wood does. He's on fire. We're all behind him. The love for him from the Forest fans on Friday night was absolute. He fed off it. And I think Chris Wood is one of the reasons why we're going to maintain this charge at this moment in time. Top performer. Deserves a bit more respect than any of us are giving him.
I agree with everything apart from the Kevin Nolan stat, because he's a central midfielder. Everything else was perfect. But I also think it makes the next step easier, because Forest have made no secret of the fact that they want to spend money on a centre forward. You've mentioned Eddie Nketiah. Marmoush was talked about. Girassi another one that they've had a look at. In fact, there's a long list. Jimenez at PSV. There's a lot of players that they've looked at. I think you can do it now in a more considered way, because there's not that absolute necessity in January now to sign a centre forward. And I think if Forest do get a top 10 finish or thereabouts this season, and there's no reason why they can't, you're then a way more attractive proposition for a centre forward next summer when you want to put the money down. So I think Chris's form right now is going to help them in other ways as well, in terms of who the next man is. But there has to be a next man. I mean, Chris's age tells you that he can't do it forever. So they've got to maintain the practical approach that that's a position that they've got to fill. That's not to say that Chris isn't going to be part of it for the foreseeable future moving forward, because he will. But I just think they're in a... One or two said no, didn't they, last summer, because they maybe didn't believe in what this season would look like. I think you may revisit one or two of those players moving forward, and they might change their view. And Chris is going to have a direct impact on that, I'm sure.
Russell's beating me to this in the chat. A player that I really like the look of. What about Liam Delap? Some big club's going to buy him. Could Forest maybe gamble on him sooner, or is it that ilk of striker Fletcher in general?
Well, look, if you said I'm going to go on a 5 to 7 game sample size and I'm going to make my decision based on that, then you'd buy Liam Delap. But my challenge to that would be, what if by the end of the season Liam Delap's only scored 3 more goals? Would you then buy him then? I think it's easy to say he's the fashionable one right now, and I'm sure somebody will. I don't think I've seen enough of him in the Premier League just yet to say he's the heir apparent to Chris Wood and he's worth 35, 40 million at this stage. I think I'd like to be a little bit more patient, see how the season plays out. If he maintains the consistency throughout the season, then yeah, sure. But I don't think they necessarily need to narrow it down at this stage. I think they can take a really global view of that position. So yeah, a lot of talent came through at Manchester City, so he'll be fundamentally a very good footballer. Everything that he's done to this point says yes, but it doesn't always factor that they're going to continue scoring at the rate they're at now. So I just pump the brakes. I go back to the point I've just made. Chris Wood means that they don't have to go into January and buy a centre forward. So just pump the brakes and make sure you get the right one. Because if they do get the right one, then they're going to be a significantly better team again, because they're going to upgrade a really important position. So yeah, Delap, great idea. I'm sure he's on their list, as will others be. But let's just take our time and make sure that the right one comes.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I would say partly because I was watching Match Today over breakfast, and he's just a big, strong centre forward, but he struggled on loan.
You'd take George Hurst based on the weekend at as well, because I mean he scored one, made one, looked fantastic. His dad's David, scored goals in the Premier League, so why not? But I think they've just got to take their time, because all of a sudden the recruitment's great. I looked this morning, was it 65 million they spent in the summer? Everybody's contributing. Milenkovic looks like the signing of the season for anybody at 12 million quid. I don't think anybody's had anybody pound for pound better than him. Jota Silva, I think, deserves a starting place in the team. He's a big favourite of mine. I think you could start to find a place where he can start. There's a world where he's a more important player than he's been up to now. Elliot Anderson's a hit straight away. So they're now starting to buy less and get more out of less. I think this is all trending towards spending money wisely. And if they can follow that through with a centre forward, then they're going to take massive strides.
This always happens in the live chat. They're just throwing different names in there. They're all good. We'll do them again.
Give us a few, Matt. Give us a few.
Do you want to have any guesses? Young
we
striker.
We can have a tick or a cross, can't we, next to the ones that have been suggested?
Those two will be on my list. Evan Ferguson's the one that's mentioned. Took his goal very well at the weekend. Liam Delap profile is different to Chris Wood. He likes to run from deep. He carries the ball well. He's not necessarily quite the same target man running the same aerial duels, but great feet. He's finding the corner. I think it's 5 in 9 for Ipswich. Evan Ferguson's passed the test of time, hasn't he? He wasn't a flash in the pan. He's come from relative obscurity in Ireland. But the profile of those types of player, of lads of that age that you can nurture and make something of, I think would fit the mould of the type of player we're looking to get. But both would be very expensive on the way out.
I also think as well, if you've got a situation where Wolves were relegated, then Mateus Cunha comes into the equation as well. So things will develop over the course of the... Have you just texted in, Ted? Are they some of your suggestions?
No.
Yeah, direct line into the recruitment team.
Michael from Nottingham's just straight into Matt Davies's laptop.
No, there's a good few. I mean, we're getting way off topic. Strand Larsen as well looks decent. Last thing on Chris Woods, from being in the ground temps as well, I feel is important. Like, he started on such a back foot with the fans. Now to hear him chanting his name, he's got 2 chants. I'm just really pleased for him, and I think he's won fans over the hard way, hasn't he?
Yeah, blood, sweat, and tears. But the thing you should take heart from now is Eddie Howe was absolutely vilified when he spent 20 million quid on Chris Wood. And now he's been absolutely vilified because he sold Chris Wood for £10 million. And that's the nature of football. The Twitter sphere and every football fan in the world is a hindsight expert. And whilst we're bagging the club for signing him, Newcastle fans are celebrating the fact they've offloaded this, donkey workhorse relic of an old-fashioned striker who's never going to come good. He immediately pops up and bags one of the Forest all-time great hat-tricks at St. James's Park. And look at him now. Flying, absolutely flying. All-time record goal scorer for New Zealand in a bang-average side playing against some decent teams. He's proved his worth again and again. And to Sean Dyche's point, or Eddie Howe, all these people that have tracked Chris Wood over a prolonged period of time, he's a man that has sustained his goal scoring in the Premier League. And I think the only debate now, and Fletcher and I had this last time we were on, is his contract extension 1 year, 2 years, or 3, because there's life in him yet.
Can you tell me who's second on the New Zealand list? And it's not Richard Hadley. I mean, it's all right jumping that. Can you tell me who's the second highest scorer for New Zealand?
Oh my God.
Can I name
Ryan Nelson?
Martin Crowe. I don't know who it is.
Jesus, is it Jonah Lomu? I don't know.
Not a clue. Not a clue. But I echo everything you've said, mate. And just on Eddie Howe being vilified for spending the money that he spent on Chris Wood. Wonder what they said about Vlachodimos. I mean, that makes the Chris Wood signing look like the deal of the year. I don't quite know what they said about that one.
Let's put John Joe to one side and keep dealing with Newcastle because we're getting the better end of these deals.
Yeah, we'll forgive them John Joe Shelby now after Elliot Anderson and Chris Wood, certainly. Just staying with underestimating people in general, Ryan Yates and Nico Dominguez, Fletch. We love Ryan Yates. He's progressing every game, and Dominguez as well, doing a great job for the team.
Please don't ever put me in the bracket of underestimating Ryan Yates because I don't. I've had numerous and continue to have numerous arguments with people that the team is a better team when he's on the pitch. And I'll stand steadfastly by that until they buy a player of his type better than him. I think teams need certain characters, certain individuals. It's not always about what your 25-yard pass looks like. There are lots of layers to Ryan that are really important to this group, to the dressing room, on the pitch, his competitive spirit, his will to win, starting to add goals to his game, starting to get himself into deeper positions in the penalty area. And this is still relatively early in his career as a first-team player, Premier League player. This is not a guy that's got 350 Premier League games under his belt. He's learning on the fly. Very, very important. The fact he plays most games, if not all the games when he's available, tells you what the respective managers think about him. So I will always stand the corner of Ryan Yates because I think he's one of the most important parts of the Forest team. And I'll stand by that. I just think it's dangerous sometimes that as football supporters, we are allowed to be knee-jerk. It's what we do. We watch someone for 10 minutes and they're good or they're crap, right? That's part of being a football fan. It's brilliant. But, I think you mentioned Nico Dominguez. I don't know whether Dominguez is in there to stay. When Morgan Gibbs-White comes back, what do you do? Because you've got to find a role for Elliot Anderson. Dominguez has played well. Morgan has to go back in, you'd presume. So you've got the competition for places. And I think this is the first time as a Premier League squad, it feels tense, like we've got players knocking on the manager's door saying, hang on a second, I should be in the team, which can only be healthy. And I think that whole midfield area now, you've got numbers, good players who should play. And when they get into the team, they've got to play well, otherwise they're coming straight back out again because there are players who want to replace them. So I think it's a really positive thing for them. But my view, and I'm happy to be persuaded otherwise. My view, if they're going to play 3 in midfield and everybody's available, it would still right now be Yates, Anderson, and Gibbs-White as the 10. And I still, despite the couple of games, I'd still probably take Elliot in that slot over Dominguez.
Let's just talk about that midfield depth. So first game of the season, it's Danilo, Sangare and Gibbs-White that get the nod. And every time there's been a suspension, injury or reason for them not being in the side, we've managed to find a central midfielder who hasn't diluted the quality that's in there. I think that's been a hallmark of our season. Every time the next cab off the rank comes in, they've performed. And there's a real headache for Nuno when everybody is fit and firing, because we're without all three of those players that started the Bournemouth draw in August. Nico Dominguez was really effective. He was playing short passes, but that's not his game. Without the ball, Fletch called this before we'd even seen him in a Forest shirt, king of the press, knows when to fly, knows when to sit deep, a very, very considered footballer, knows where the ball's going to be. And I just think he adds a lot to this team. On Ryan Yates, there was a really nice moment with Martin O'Neill on the broadcast where he talked about the fact that he has the heart of a lion, and despite any shortcoming that he may have, he's proved time and time again why he has a role to play for Forest. He'd like to score more goals. He would have loved to have tapped that one in the back stick that was harder to miss than it was to stick away. But for what he does without the ball, what he's increasingly doing with the ball, because I think he has improved as a footballer in the classic sense. He's a massive, massive part of this squad, this team, this spirit on and off the pitch. And he is that surviving connection to the academy, to the championship run, to the times we've had over the last few years. What a story it is that Ryan Yates is living his dream, captaining Forest in the Premier League and doing as well as he is.
Would you put money on Anderson being in the next England squad, Fletch, or a bit too early?
Maybe a bit too early. Maybe a bit too early. I think, again, I mean, look at the midfielders England have got. I mean, if you're in there, you're talking about rarefied air. I mean, there is a scenario. If Tuchel picks what some consider to be his best team, you'd have to leave Declan Rice out potentially. So I think it's difficult. It's a difficult slot to get into. I mean, I would just concentrate on the fact that when that deal was made, and you know, there's a lot of after timers. A lot of people say, well, that's a lot of money for him. Here they go. That's a lot of money for him. Well, it looks like a really good deal, because a top quality central midfield player is a difficult player to find, and they've got one in him. And the only thing that held him back at Newcastle was injury. It just got himself in the team, and then he got hurt. And then he found that Newcastle midfield that was going to be Tonali, Joe Linton, Guimaraes before Tonali was suspended. That's a very difficult team to get in, because if it's not Tonali, it's Longstaff. So that's a really talented group. So the only reason he wasn't playing was injury, and he was in a really tough circumstance when he came back. He can also play a variety of positions. I've seen him play wide for Newcastle when he's come on as well, essentially shown he's proficient as a 10. I think he's probably better suited as an 8. But whichever way you want to use him, he's just a really good footballer, and he's only going to get better. So I don't think he needs England right now. I think he needs a really solid season where he plays the majority of games in the Premier League, and then he can really kick on, because he's got to deal with that as well. If you think about it, he's going to play more Premier League games this season than he's ever played before. So physically, mentally, that's going to be a challenge for him in the second half of the season. And that might be where the likes of Dominguez, etc., are valuable, that every now and again you can just take him out, give him a rest, make sure that he's tip-top, because you know, he's going to do something this season that he's not done before.
He does get subbed a lot quite early, doesn't he? Because he's gassed after 75 minutes. So that's a fair point, certainly. Just lastly on midfield attempts quickly. Is it, I mean, for me, it's Gibbs, White, Anderson, and another. And, you know, another could be really good because of the way they're all playing when they're all fit, and there's no rush to get Morgan back in the team at all. But is it those two and one other for you as well?
I don't think it's that clean cut for Elliot Anderson. I think Gibbs White starts whenever he's fit. James Ward-Prowse is going to be pressure on his minutes when those guys come back, and Nico Dominguez does what he does, and Anthony Langer has emerged as this corner taker extraordinaire. So I think there's a little bit of pressure there, but yeah, what a nice problem to have. It's going to be particularly hard, I think, for Danilo and Sangare to prove their fitness and find the minutes to get back into this side, because it's got so much momentum. But thoroughly impressed by Anderson. Love watching him in that England under-21s game, which he ran. If you want to look at an example of a central midfielder dictating a game of football, that was him at that level. It's a massive leap to the senior team. He's competing with Declan Rice, who is one of the most complete midfielders in the Premier League. So I think we're getting carried away a little bit there. But the true cost of that deal, when you consider it in light of the Vlachodimos thing, which is a related transaction, is truly excellent. I think we've got a real player on our hands.
Do you know, just in terms of the way that midfield is going to balance off, it kind of takes us back to what we spoke about at the top of the podcast. And that is, if you look at those numbers, Forest's second fewest passes in the Premier League this season, 5th or 6th in terms of long balls this season. That tells you that they are a team that are going to play relatively deep. That tells you that you've got to have someone with real defensive nous in front of your back four. And it tells you that you've got to have someone on the pitch at the time that's going to do a really strong defensive shift. And I think that starts to trend it towards Ryan Yates quite strongly based on the way that they're playing right now. The protection for the 2 centre-backs, the fact that you're going to be quite deep, and then you're going to go long to the wingers and use the speed out wide. I think that trends more to a disruptor, an aggressive ball-winning central midfield player being on the pitch at that time, because it kind of suits the way that the team are playing at the moment. I don't necessarily think you want 3 passes in there when you're not having the ball very often. And it is quite stark, the number of passes Forest have completed in the Premier League this season compared to the teams around them. You know, this seems to be an affliction of the teams at the bottom, not in Southampton's case. They've been really good at it. But it does kind of trend towards needing that kind of influence on the pitch more often than not if this system's going to be effective for the whole season.
I think he will be in the next England squad, by the way, instead of Morgan, because Morgan's not going to be fit, and Kobbie Mainoo's injured as well, isn't he? So I just
Yates
wonder.
for England. That's what we need. Yates for England. Get Yatesy there.
Don't rule it out. Yeah, don't rule it out, definitely. Right, just before we finish up by talking about is this sustainable, last thing I wanted to touch on. Let me find my graphic. Here we go. Thank you very much to Global Telemetrics. I saw my points in the chat, by the way, earlier. Surrounded by Leicester fans at work. So he's having a good day. Thank you very much to Global Telemetrics. Over £3 million worth of stolen vehicles recovered in October, including multiple Toyota Hilux, Range Rovers, motorhomes, Ferraris, and Temps's Rolls-Royce. So thank you very much to them for their backing. It was good off in Temps, wasn't it, to get it back?
Let's not talk cars and Fletcher's on here. I've had a couple of lists with him. One in his chauffeur and Maybach, and one in his wholly owned Porsche. So I think if there's any call being made to Global Telemetrics, it's from D. Fletcher.
Am I the first person to ask whether that's Matt's car on that picture?
Surely.
Surely. Things are going that well. No, but they're always genuinely recovered cars. So, yeah, thanks for letting me
Hey, do you know what? I did the podcast once before, and somebody had a right go at me for having a pop at you about your adverts. I had a right go. Like I was like being nasty to you. So I thought, get over yourself, mate.
You did get some stick that week, yeah.
Hey?
You got some stick that week, didn't you? Yeah.
Behave. I'm like, behave.
It's water off a duck's back, all that. Don't worry, I'm fine. It's good banter. Right, Fletch, you've touched on this a little bit before about around how sustainable is this. I think we've got 2 home games to come, and then we go to Arsenal. So every game feels like a barometer these days. But just in general, are the positive signs there for you that this could be sustainable for another 29 games, whatever we've got left?
Is that Arsenal who are only 2 points ahead of us in the league table
exactly.
at the moment? Arsenal are 2 points. We're
1
above
point.
Man United. 1 point is it now? Above Man United, above Tottenham, been to Chelsea, been to Liverpool. So would we be overly concerned about going to Arsenal? Is going to Arsenal any different to going to Anfield or Stamford Bridge at the minute? I don't know. I think it's sustainable. I think it's sustainable because of the way that he's doing it. If all of these away games you're facing 25 shots and they're hitting the woodwork 16 times and you're scrambling 3 or 4 off the line, then I would say not sustainable. But I think the manner of the away performances, there's a real method to it. Suits the players. I think Milenkovic's influence back there is immense. I think he's made Murillo a better defender. I think he's a lot sharper, Murillo, this year. In a defensive sense than he was. I think you'd only say it's not sustainable if you kind of looked at it and said, well, this is all being done by smoke and mirrors, but it's not. Chris Wood's scoring authentically good goals. Callum Hudson-Odoi is doing what Callum Hudson-Odoi does. The midfield has been functional and better. Goalkeepers done well when they need him. And I think, if they've got like a starting 11 and then nothing more, then you can say a couple of injuries and it could all go to nothing. But one of my mates messaged me this morning and said, I'm worried if we lost Milenkovic. And I understand that. But then you've got Morato and Willy Bolly, who would be alternatives. Now, Willy was a starter not that long ago, and people were waxing lyrical about how good a defender he is. So he's probably 4th choice now. So there's depth everywhere. So I think they can change both wingers, and that's fine. They can mix the midfield up. We've just spoken about that, and that's fine. There's depth at centre back. They've got Nico Williams can play fullback on either side. So if he's your backup, you've got cover on both sides. You've got another goalkeeper. It was only 2 or 3 weeks ago that fans wanted Carlos Miguel to play. He's available too. So quietly and effectively, they've put together a good squad, good team, but they've got depth as well. So I think the style of play, the number of players means that it's very much sustainable. Whether that leads to, at some stage, a slight dip in where they are now, that wouldn't surprise me. Whether they can sustain the results at the level that they are and stay around the top 6 to 8, I think is a big challenge just based on the teams around them. But I certainly think that this team looks like a mid-table group, way better than I thought they were going to be at the start of the year. I thought they'd be in that little group below, not getting relegated, but not quite as high. So I've got to eat humble pie in that regard, that they're better than I thought. But I don't see any reason why it's not sustainable. I think there'll be peaks and troughs as the year goes on, because there always are. The big area that concerns me is centre forward. I think if they lost Chris, I'd be concerned, because I think he's a different player to Taiwo. He's a more consistent player to Taiwo, and I've still got the fear that at some stage Taiwo is going to get injured too. So that'd be the one area where I'd be concerned. But no, I think it's very sustainable. Maybe not quite at the level it's at now, but certainly good enough to have a really good season.
There's a comment right at the start of the chat that I forgot to show from Danscape saying that he thinks we can chalk off the relegation chat and he's optimistic, but he does say in 2008-2009 Hull had 20 points after 9 games and finished 17th on 35 points.
Yeah,
I don't see that happening though. Temps, do you?
No, I don't. There's some underachieving big dogs out there at the minute, isn't there? I think we have to expect Man United, Spurs, and Newcastle to spark some kind of revival. But the bottom 6 look like the bottom 6: Leicester, Everton, Palace, Ipswich, Wolves, Southampton. I don't think they're going to trouble us. We now go into 2 home games against West Ham and Newcastle, which will start as favourites because of form and the respective form of those teams. And what can happen from there? You're on your way. Like we're not going to do what Hull have done. There's far more about this Forest side than that. I do think that, and this is probably an unfashionable thing to say, Man United, with that level of resource and what's within that squad, will improve from where they are now. We have to think Newcastle will. We have to think Spurs will. I think their result against Palace was a bit of a blip. But that's our route to a top 10 finish. We are absolutely competing with the Brentfords, the Fulhams, the Bournemouths, the West Hams, and there's no reason why we can't finish above them. I've just said there's 6 that are cut adrift. So you can make a case quite quickly to say how we get towards 10th, which would be a massive kick on from where we were last season. And there is a world in which Man U completely blow up. I don't quite see it myself. Johnny Evans is out the side now, that they're not quite as dire as they were perhaps 2 and 3 weeks ago. But they've got a fundamental decision to make around Eric Ten Hag's future at some point. So
I'll
there's a route to top
10.
10.
I'll interrupt you there. Fabrizio Romano just tweeted that basically they're going to sack Ten Hag. They're discussing internally sacking him and replacing him with Van Nistelrooy as an interim manager. So just sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, so, and there'll be a reaction to that, because Man United are a far better club than they're showing at this moment in time. So that's the route to the top 10. I think what Fletch says is absolutely bang on. Top 6 is fanciful. 7th and 8th feels unlikely still, but let's dare to dream and see where we are in 2 games' time. I think we've got a legitimate challenge here for top 10.
Yeah, we did a podcast on the BBC last night, and the only conclusion that we all came to was that Ten Hag had to go today. So that seems like everybody's in agreement now in the Ineos camp as well. Do you know another little intangible that I'd not really thought about until a couple of days ago? Forest have never really been in the Premier League and played with any freedom, no pressure, because they've always been in the middle of a relegation battle ever since they've been promoted. And it's gone really late into the season, and everybody's been panicking. And that the squad must feel that too. I think it's going to be really interesting to see when they get to Christmas. And by Christmas, they've got enough points that they're not going to get relegated. I'm interested to see what the second half of the season looks like when they can just go and play, where there's no pressure of being dragged into a relegation battle because they've done the hard work. They've got the points on the board. They're okay. If they get to that point, then I think all bets are off, because then you can start to say, right, shackles off. Let's go and enjoy it. Then momentum can really build. And we've seen this with teams like Brighton, Newcastle. The year that Newcastle got into the Champions League, they did it pretty much pressure-free because nobody thought they were going to get there. So while others were getting a lot of questions asked about why are you not in the top four, Newcastle just rolled out there every week with the fans behind them and enjoyed it. Brighton did it when they sneaked into a European place. They just rolled, and everybody was saying, God, Brighton, could Brighton get into Europe? This is fantastic. And the players went, yeah, we're really enjoying this. Let's just go and win again. So I think the ultimate position will be aided quite significantly by the fact that they can play with the handbrake off and just go and enjoy it. And nobody's asking whether the manager's going to get fired. You know, nobody's digging too much into the whys and wherefores of every result. You can just roll it along and get your wins. And if you do lose, it's not that much of an issue because you can just go again because you're not playing the pressure. So I'm excited to see that. And I hope that becomes the case, because then I think at that point, a lot of things can happen. You know, you can also then start to look at the FA Cup, can't you? And say, well, we're not worried about the Premier League because we're safe. We're going to be all right. So let's have a right good go at getting deep into this competition. You know, all of a sudden it opens up a whole world of possibilities if they can get to Christmas in a really strong position.
I see a lot of players on this side now playing with that freedom. I think Murillo and Milenkovic can look at each other and the battles they're having and coming out on top on and think, yeah, there's something going here. It's a quiet, understated confidence, isn't it? It's there. Ola Reyna's in that same bracket. Chris Wood's in that same bracket. Elanga and Hudson-Odoi aren't confined by what Forest have been in the past. They've been brought in as those players to kick us on and make us front foot. So, yeah, and entirely valid. And I hope that mindset perpetuates, because the evidence of what we're seeing now is it's already instilled.
Yeah, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Anthony Elanga, you know, Morgan Gibbs-White playing with freedom and relaxed in the second half of the season, feeding Chris Wood could be fantastic.
Can I ask you two a question?
Mm.
Would you pick Jota Silva over Anthony Elanga now?
No. I would have done before the Leicester. I had him in my team before the Leicester game, but I feel, and I've said this before, like I always go back to Brennan. I like to play players into form, and I thought Elanga was decent on Friday, and I think I prefer Elanga starting if he's in form to Jota, but I love Jota. Kelvin, I don't know if you saw it last week, Fletch. Kelvin called him a burst balloon. You know, he runs around and he wondered if he could play in the starting 11 team structure. We still haven't seen that, so maybe he can. But for the next game right now, Elanga would be back in ahead of Jota for me. What about you, Tam? Sorry.
Jota Silva for me is a little bit unstructured, and that's part of his strength. He chases lost causes, he harries. His yellow card was a little bit naive on Friday night, but the positions he gets himself to just by that absolute graft, and I know what you mean, he's on sprint constantly, isn't he? Would he blow out if he was playing at that pace for 65, 70 minutes after a Premier League start? We're interested to find out. We haven't seen it yet because of the elite attributes of Anthony Elanga, being that pace for the outball, his track record last season in goals and assists, and now at this moment, this specific role in taking set pieces really effectively. But Jota Silva's a fan favourite off the back of 20-minute cameos, so it feels like he's earned the right to have a start. I just think he's behind Elanga at this point in time in Nuno's style and way of thinking, because Jota's not about pace. He's about skill, quick feet, hassling, harrying. It's a different profile of player, but he's so good to watch.
I've also got that thought in my mind, what Anthony Elanga would look like 15 minutes off the bench when the opposition are tired and all of a sudden you send him on to terrorise, because like you say, Jota Silva's different. He's not about the speed. So Jota Silva comes on. I think sometimes it can be a little bit of a relief for the defenders who have been chasing around after Anthony Elanga for a while. I'd just like to flip it and see what it looks like. I'm fascinated to see whether Jota Silva can do it for 75 minutes from the start, and then what Elanga's impact would look like off the bench. I mean, I'm sure it'll happen at some point. I must say, though, I just really enjoy watching him. I've never heard anybody called a burst balloon before. I like that, but I love watching him. I'd just like to see a little bit more of him, I think.
I would as well. The thing I was thinking while you were talking there was that second half where we had the still earlier of Elanga and Hudson-Odoi tucked in doing a disciplined defensive job, which is the other side of the game. Like, if Jota can do that as well, then, you know.
I also think, Matt, it gives you the opportunity if Morgan Gibbs-White is the 10, because we know that Morgan can drift out into wide positions. He can quite easily switch with Jota, who can go and play, I think, in that central position. I was a little bit surprised when they played Palace on Monday night that he played Dominguez next to Yates and not Anderson next to Yates, and Jota Silva try him as a 10. Because I think you look at him in there, he can go both ways, can't he? And he's got that great ability with the ball. So I think it makes you a little bit more interchangeable at the top end of the pitch if Morgan wants to go wide and Jota then can quite happily come and fill that role in the middle. It's fascinating, though, that we've never had discussions like this before because the depth hasn't been there. So now there's this whole world of opportunity, which is great.
Is that a text saying Ten Hag's been officially sacked that you just had? That's what all my phones just telling me.
Yeah, Athletic report. David Ornstein reporting that Ten Hag's gone.
Let me tell you, if it's David Ornstein, it's right. He's the best. He's the best.
He is. Right, just before we wrap things up, over 600 people watching, which is great. Do us a favour, hit like, hit subscribe. You can become a channel member. Give us a lovely review on iTunes and Spotify as well. Yes, thank you very much for that. Temps, anything for you before we go?
Just plug in fireworks night. Saturday is completely sold out, but if you want to get to the best, biggest fireworks night in Nottingham, 1st November at Trent Bridge, tickets.trentbridge.co.uk.
Boom.
Stuff. Boom. Fletch, anything for you before we go?
No, all good. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you both.
Yeah, very much enjoyed it. Only thing from me is a happy 75th birthday to John McGovern today, hero of the club.
Legend. Yeah. Happy birthday, John.
Yeah. Without him and those boys, and and Evangelos Marinakis might not have bought the football club. We might not be in the Premier League. We might not be here now. So There you go. Right, we shall leave it there. We shall be back on Wednesday with Dan's story, and then Thursday we'll look ahead to West Ham. So lots of good stuff coming up, lots of stuff to enjoy. Do join us for that. But if we don't see you tomorrow, because we won't, there's no show. If we don't see you on Wednesday, we shall see you soon.